September 19, 1944, 7:45 in the morning. Hill 246, near Arracourt, France. Sergeant Henry Staci pressed his eye against the gunner's sight of his M18 tank destroyer, scanning the tree line at the base of the hill. Thick morning fog rolled across the French countryside, reducing visibility to less than 200 yards. Behind him, 3 more M18s from Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon waited in hull-down positions, their engines idling quietly. They called these machines Hellcats. At just under 20 tons, they were lighter than any combat vehicle Germany fielded. Their armor was barely 1 inch thick on the sides, less than an armored car. A direct hit from almost any German tank gun would punch straight through. But what the M18 lacked in protection, it made up for in pure, devastating speed. Through the fog, Staci spotted movement. A dark shape emerged from the woods, low and angular. Then another, and another. His blood ran cold as he recognized the distinctive sloped armor and long gun barrel. Panthers, Germany's most feared medium tank. 45 tons of steel, armed with a 75mm high-velocity gun that could kill a Sherman tank at 2,000 yards. Protected by frontal armor 4.5 inches thick, sloped at 55 degrees to deflect shells like water off a roof. Against a Panther in a head-on fight, an M18 crew's life expectancy was measured in seconds. But Sergeant Staci wasn't planning a fair fight. This is the story of the M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of World War II, and how American speed defeated German steel. To understand why America built the M18, you need to understand the terror that swept through Allied commanders in the spring of 1940. France fell in 6 weeks. German Panzer divisions smashed through French and British defenses like a hammer through glass. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, combined massed armor with air support in a way no one had seen before. Tank formations would punch through defensive lines, then race into the rear areas, destroying supply depots, headquarters, and reserve formations before defenders could react. American military planners watched this disaster and drew one conclusion. Tanks were now the dominant weapon on the modern battlefield, and America needed a way to stop them. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce. He would become the father of the American tank destroyer force, and the driving vision behind the M18 Hellcat. Bruce had studied German tactics obsessively. He understood what made Blitzkrieg work: concentration of force at a single point, breakthrough, then exploitation. But he also saw the weakness. German panzer formations, once they broke through, were vulnerable. They'd outrun their supply lines. They'd be operating in unfamiliar territory. They'd be exposed. Bruce's solution was revolutionary: create specialized anti-tank battalions equipped with vehicles faster than German tanks. When enemy armor broke through, these battalions would race to intercept them. Not defend statically, not absorb the attack, hunt them down and destroy them. The tank destroyer force was officially established in November 1941. Bruce's vision was clear. He wanted vehicles that were fast, well-armed, and cheap enough to mass-produce. Armor protection was secondary. Speed was everything. The road to the M18 was paved with failed prototypes and bitter lessons. The first American tank destroyer, the M6, was essentially a 37mm anti-tank gun mounted on a Dodge truck. When it deployed to North Africa in 1942, German crews destroyed them effortlessly. The 37mm gun couldn't penetrate German armor. The truck offered no protection whatsoever. By early 1943, American forces were using the M10 Wolverine as their primary tank destroyer. The M10 was built on a Sherman tank chassis, which made it reliable but slow. Top speed was just 30 miles per hour. It was armed with a 3-inch gun, powerful enough to destroy most German tanks, but the vehicle was too heavy and too slow for Bruce's vision of mobile tank hunting. In January 1943, Buick Motor Division of General Motors began working on a revolutionary design: The project was designated T-70. Later, it would become the M18. The key innovation was treating the tank destroyer like a race car rather than a traditional armored vehicle. Buick's engineers, who normally designed luxury automobiles, applied automotive thinking to military hardware. They started with a powerful engine, the Continental R975, a 9-cylinder radial aircraft engine producing 400 horsepower. The same engine used in Sherman tanks, which weighed 30 tons. But the M18 would weigh just 17.5 tons. That power-to-weight ratio was extraordinary. 23 horsepower per ton, compared to 11 for the Sherman and 15 for the German Panther. The transmission was automotive too, a Torquematic automatic transmission that allowed drivers to shift gears without using a clutch. This was revolutionary for tracked vehicles in 1943. It made the M18 easier to drive and allowed for faster acceleration and speed changes during combat. The suspension used torsion bars, long steel rods that twisted to absorb shock. This gave the M18 a smooth ride even at high speeds over rough terrain. German tankers would later report that they couldn't believe how fast the American tank destroyers moved across broken ground without throwing tracks or breaking down. But the most controversial design choice was the armor, or rather, the lack of it. The M18's hull armor was just 1 inch thick on the front, half an inch on the sides. The turret had slightly better protection, 1 inch on the front, 3/4 of an inch on the sides. By comparison, a Sherman had 2 inches of frontal hull armor. A Panther had nearly 5 inches. This was deliberate. Every pound of armor added weight. Weight reduced speed. Speed was the M18's primary defense. If you couldn't be hit, you didn't need thick armor. Critics within the Army said this was suicidal. That crews would die. That no one would volunteer to crew vehicles with armor so thin that heavy machine guns could penetrate it. They were wrong. The armament was the 76mm M1 gun, a high-velocity weapon capable of penetrating most German armor at combat ranges. It fired a 17-pound armor-piercing shell at 2,600 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, it could punch through 3.5 inches of armor. That was enough to kill a Panther from the side or rear. It could even destroy a Tiger tank if the shot hit the right spot. The gun was mounted in an open-topped turret that could rotate a full 360 degrees. This gave M18 crews exceptional situational awareness. They could see threats from any direction. By July 1943, 6 T-70 prototypes were complete. They underwent testing at General Motors' Milford Proving Ground, the same facility where Buick tested its civilian cars. Engineers measured top speed on a banked oval track, 55 miles per hour. The M18 was officially the fastest tracked fighting vehicle in the world. The Army ordered 3,000 M18s off the drawing board before testing was even complete. Production began immediately. Between July 1943 and October 1944, Buick manufactured 2,507 M18 Hellcats. At peak production, they were building 250 per month. Each one cost $57,000, about half the cost of a Sherman tank. The men who would crew the M18 Hellcats were different from traditional tankers. Tank destroyer battalions were organized differently from tank battalions. Each TD battalion had 36 tank destroyers organized into 3 companies. But unlike tank units, which fought as massed formations, tank destroyer doctrine emphasized flexibility and rapid response. Crew training emphasized 3 principles: speed, positioning, and first shot kills. Speed meant using the M18's mobility to reach firing positions before the enemy arrived. It meant repositioning after every engagement. It meant never staying in one place long enough for German artillery to find you. Positioning meant choosing ground carefully. Hull-down positions where only the turret was exposed. Reverse slopes where the M18 could back away quickly after firing. Terrain that gave clear fields of fire while offering cover. First shot kills were critical. because thin armor meant you rarely got a second chance. Gunners practiced constantly, learning to estimate range, lead moving targets, and identify weak points on German armor. The ideal engagement went like this. German armor advances along a road. American observers spot them and radio the TD battalion. M18s race to positions overlooking the road, arriving before the Germans. They wait in concealment. When German tanks reach the kill zone, M18s open fire from the flanks, hitting side and rear armor where protection is weakest. After destroying or disrupting the enemy formation, the M18s withdraw at high speed before German forces can respond. In theory, it was elegant. In practice, war is messy. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion would get their first chance to prove the doctrine in combat during September 1944. The place: Arracourt, France. The enemy: Germany's best panzer units, equipped with Panther tanks and supported by experienced crews. It would become the defining battle for the M18 Hellcat. Sergeant Staci's M18 fired first. The 76mm gun cracked, sending a 17-pound armor-piercing shell downrange at 2,600 feet per second. 800 yards. Time to target: less than half a second. The shell struck the lead Panther on the side turret, where armor was only 2 inches thick. The penetrator punched through, and the interior of the tank became a hell of spalling metal fragments and exploding ammunition. The Panther lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from the turret hatches. Staci's loader had already chambered another round. 10 seconds after the first shot, Staci fired again. Another Panther hit in the engine compartment. Flames erupted from the rear deck. 2 shots, 2 kills. In less than 15 seconds. The other M18s opened fire. Lieutenant Leiper's platoon destroyed 5 German tanks in the first 5 minutes of engagement. This was the moment everything changed. This was when theory became reality. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, we need to step back and see the bigger picture of what was happening that September morning. General George Patton's Third Army had been advancing rapidly across France since the breakout from Normandy. By mid-September, American forces had crossed the Moselle River and were pushing toward the German border. The 4th Armored Division, one of Patton's best units, had established positions near Arracourt. But Patton's supply lines were stretched thin. His tanks were outrunning their fuel. His infantry was exhausted. This was exactly the kind of overextension German commanders were trained to exploit. Hitler ordered a counteroffensive. The objective: destroy the 4th Armored Division and push American forces back across the Moselle. The force, 5th Panzer Army, including the elite 11th Panzer Division and 2 new Panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th. The German force assembled 262 tanks and assault guns. Most were Panzerscharfürs, the workhorse of the German army. But the spearhead units included Panthers, the most feared tank on the battlefield. Against this, Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division had just 53 Sherman tanks. But they also had one critical advantage: Company C of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. 12 M18 Hellcats. September 19th dawned cold and foggy. Visibility was less than 200 yards. German commanders saw this as an advantage. Their experienced crews could navigate by compass and close to point-blank range before American forces could react. They didn't know that M18 Hellcats were waiting on Hill 246. At 7:30 a.m., Captain Thomas Evans, commanding Company C of the 704th, received urgent orders from Colonel Bruce Clark. German armor was advancing in strength. Evans was to take his tank destroyers and stop them. Evans grabbed the nearest platoon, Lieutenant Leiper's 4 M18s. They raced toward Hill 246, arriving at 7:45. And that's where Sergeant Staci opened fire. The German column was in chaos. Panthers tried to reverse, to turn, to locate their attackers through the fog. But the M18s were positioned on high ground, turrets barely visible over the crest of the hill. German gunners couldn't see them clearly enough to return fire. Then German training and discipline kicked in. A Panther's gun rotated toward the hilltop. The German gunner had spotted movement. 75mm high-velocity guns fired. One shell struck Sergeant Staci's M18, hitting the gun shield. The impact didn't fully penetrate, but fragments ricocheted through the turret, wounding 2 crew members. Staci's tank was out of action. Lieutenant Leiper made the tactical decision: withdraw. They destroyed 5 enemy tanks and disrupted the German advance. Staying longer risked losing the entire platoon. But this was just the opening engagement. The real battle was about to begin. By 9 a.m. the fog was lifting. That's when the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's gunners saw what they were really facing. 30 German tanks advancing in a ragged line across the valley floor. Panthers and Panzer I-4s, supported by infantry and self-propelled guns. Behind them, more armor was visible, at least 50 vehicles in total. Captain Evans had brought up his remaining M18s. 8 Hellcats now held positions on the high ground overlooking the German advance. Alongside them, Sherman tanks from the 37th Tank Battalion took up supporting positions. The German commander had made a fatal error. He'd ordered his tanks to advance across open ground, assuming American forces would withdraw in the face of superior numbers. Standard Blitzkrieg doctrine: mass your force, punch through, keep moving. But Blitzkrieg doctrine assumed the enemy wouldn't have tank destroyers positioned on overlooking terrain with clear fields of fire. What followed became known in 4th Armored Division as the Turkey Shoot. M18 gunners had perfect firing conditions, clear visibility, targets silhouetted against the valley floor, range less than 1,000 yards, and most importantly, flank shots. The Panthers advancing across the valley presented their sides to the American positions. That meant the M18s were shooting at armor just 2 inches thick instead of the 4.5-inch frontal plate. At these ranges, against side armor, the 76mm gun was devastating. The Hellcats opened fire systematically. Gunners selected targets, fired, reloaded, selected the next target. The discipline was extraordinary. No wasted shots, no panic, just methodical destruction. A Panther fired up, struck in the side. The crew bailed out, running for cover. Another Panther tried to reverse into dead ground. An armor-piercing shell caught it in the engine compartment. The tank burst into flames. German tanks tried to return fire, but they faced multiple problems. First, they couldn't see all their attackers. M18s were positioned in several locations, creating crossfire. German gunners would engage one target, only to be hit from a different direction. Second, the M18's low profile made them difficult targets. In hull-down positions, only the turret was visible. Panthers had to score direct hits on a target less than 3 feet tall at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Third, the moment an M18 took fire, it could withdraw at 55 miles per hour. German tank commanders would order their gunners to fire, but by the time the shell arrived, the target had moved. Panthers could only manage 28 miles per hour cross-country. They simply couldn't chase an M18. The engagement lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the valley floor was littered with burning German vehicles. American intelligence counted 39 destroyed German tanks and assault guns. The 704th TD Battalion claimed 19 kills. The 37th Tank Battalion claimed 29 more. American losses: 4 M18s damaged, 3 destroyed. 7 Sherman tanks knocked out. The kill ratio was extraordinary. The Germans had lost 39 armored vehicles. The Americans had lost 10. That's nearly 4-to-1. German after-action reports from Arracourt show confusion and fear. Tank commanders described American tank destroyers appearing from nowhere, firing from impossible ranges, then vanishing before German forces could respond. They reported American vehicles that could outrun our tanks even while retreating. One German commander wrote, "The Americans have deployed a new weapon, a fast tank destroyer with a powerful gun. Our Panthers cannot catch them. Our standard tactics are ineffective against such mobility." The Battle of Arracourt continued for several more days. By September 29th, when the fighting finally ended, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 90 destroyed or damaged German armored vehicles. The entire 4th Armored Division claimed nearly 200 kills. German 5th Panzer Army had been shattered. The counteroffensive that was supposed to push Americans back across the Moselle had instead resulted in catastrophic losses. The 113th Panzer Brigade was effectively destroyed, reduced to less than a dozen operational tanks. The M18 Hellcat had passed its first major test with flying colors. But the real test of the design, the ultimate challenge to the concept of speed as armor, would come 3 months later in the frozen forests of Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge would ask a brutal question. Could speed save you when the weather turned against you, when the terrain favored defenders, when you were surrounded and outnumbered? That winter would provide the answer. December 16, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. German artillery opened fire along an 85-mile front. Hundreds of guns launching thousands of shells into American positions. This was Hitler's last gamble in the West. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. 3 German armies, over 200,000 men, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, smashed into thinly held American lines. The objective was ambitious: reach Antwerp, split Allied forces, and force a negotiated peace. Among the units rushed to stop the German breakthrough were several tank destroyer battalions equipped with M18 Hellcats. They would face conditions that seemed designed to neutralize every advantage the Hellcat possessed. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to the 101st Airborne Division defending Bastogne. This Belgian town sat at a critical road junction. If the Germans took Bastogne, their supply routes would be secure, and they could continue driving west. The Americans had to hold it at all costs. On December 20th, German forces surrounded Bastogne. Inside the perimeter were about 12,000 American troops, including the entire 101st Airborne Division. Supporting them were 12 M18 Hellcats from the 705th TD Battalion. The Germans had numbers and heavy armor. The Americans had determination and the M18's mobility. But could that mobility function in a siege? In winter? In forests where speed meant nothing? The answer surprised everyone, including the M18 crews themselves. The battle for Bastogne lasted 8 days. German forces repeatedly attacked the perimeter, trying to crush the surrounded Americans. Each attack included armored support: Panthers, Panzer IVs, and even a few Tiger tanks. The M18s became mobile fire brigades. When German armor attacked one sector, the Hellcats would race to that position, engage the enemy, inflict casualties, then withdraw before German artillery could respond. Their speed allowed them to shift between threatened sectors faster than the Germans could adjust their attacks. One engagement exemplifies the M18's role. On December 21st, German tanks attacked from the northeast. 3 M18s moved into position along a ridgeline overlooking the German advance. In a 15-minute engagement, they destroyed 5 German tanks before withdrawing. 1 hour later, the same 3 Hellcats were on the opposite side of the perimeter, engaging German armor attacking from the south. German commanders were frustrated. They couldn't pin down the American tank destroyers long enough to mass firepower against them. Reports filtering back to German headquarters described American fast tanks that appear and disappear like ghosts. The cold was brutal. Temperatures dropped to 10 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The M18's open-topped turret, an advantage in warm weather for visibility, became a liability. Freezing wind whipped through the crew compartment. Men wore every piece of clothing they owned, and still shivered at their stations. But the mechanical reliability that made the M18 effective in summer proved even more valuable in winter. While German tanks suffered frozen fuel lines, frozen hydraulics, and engines that wouldn't start in the cold, the M18's automotive engine fired up reliably even in sub-zero temperatures. On December 26th, Patton's Third Army broke through to relieve Bastogne. The 705th TD Battalion had lost 8 M18s during the siege, but had destroyed over 30 German tanks. More importantly, their mobile firepower had helped stop German penetrations at critical moments, buying time for infantry to reinforce threatened positions. The Battle of the Bulge proved that the M18 wasn't just a fair-weather weapon. Even in the worst conditions, against a determined enemy, the combination of speed and firepower remained effective. The concept of speed as armor had survived its ultimate test. Now let us step back and look at the cold statistics that made the M18 Hellcat America's most effective armored vehicle. Over the course of World War II, M18s were credited with 526 enemy vehicles destroyed, 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific Theater. More impressively, the kill-to-loss ratio was 2.4 to 1. For every M18 destroyed, American crews knocked out more than 2 German vehicles. Compare that to other American armored vehicles. The Sherman tank had a kill-to-loss ratio around 1.2 to 1. The M10 tank destroyer was approximately 1.8 to 1. The M36 tank destroyer, armed with a more powerful 90mm gun, was 2.1 to 1. The M18, with its controversial thin armor, achieved the best ratio of them all. Why? Speed meant M18 crews chose when and where to fight. The open-topped turret provided superior situational awareness, and the M18 was reliable. Its automotive engine and transmission rarely broke down. German Panthers, by contrast, suffered constant mechanical failures. German tankers who faced M18 Hellcats developed a healthy respect tinged with frustration. Post-war interviews with German tank commanders reveal how the M18 changed German tactical thinking. One Panther commander described an encounter. "We were advancing along a road when suddenly our lead tank exploded. We couldn't see where the shot came from. Then another tank was hit. We deployed off the road and tried to locate the enemy. By the time we identified the American positions, they were gone. They'd withdrawn at incredible speed. It was like fighting smoke." German tankers nicknamed the M18 the Sprint Panzer, the running tank. The Germans never developed an effective counter. They tried deploying more anti-tank guns, but M18s would simply find different routes. They tried using infantry anti-tank teams, but M18 crews worked closely with American infantry who screened them. For all its success, the M18 Hellcat had limitations. The open-topped turret left crews vulnerable to artillery. The 76mm gun struggled against the heaviest armor like the Tiger II. The thin armor meant any hit was potentially catastrophic. But when employed according to doctrine, by trained crews who understood speed as armor, the M18 was devastatingly effective. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, 26 M18 battalions were deployed in Europe. In just under 1 year of combat, they destroyed over 500 German vehicles at a cost of approximately 200 M18s lost. So let's return to our opening question. Did German tankers really never expect America's M18 Hellcat to outrun their Panthers at 55 miles per hour? German intelligence knew about the M18's existence by late summer 1944. What they didn't anticipate was how effectively American crews would use that speed. German doctrine was built around the assumption that in armored combat, the vehicle with superior firepower and protection would win. But that analysis assumed both sides would fight according to German rules. Meeting engagements where both sides spotted each other simultaneously and traded shots. American TD crews simply refused to fight that way. They used speed to control the terms of engagement. They chose the ground, chose the range, chose when to fire and when to withdraw. They turned every battle into an ambush. The statistics tell the story. 526 confirmed kills. A 2.4 to 1 kill ratio. The best record of any American armored vehicle. These numbers weren't achieved through superior armor or more powerful guns. They were achieved through speed, tactics, and the willingness to fight smart, rather than fair. The M18 Hellcat represents the American way of war in miniature. Not the most advanced technology. Not the heaviest armor. Not the biggest gun. But fast, reliable, produced in quantity, and employed by well-trained crews following doctrine that emphasized adaptability. Today, several M18 Hellcats survive in museums around the world. Veterans who served in M18 crews are nearly all gone now, but their stories survive in oral histories and official records. One veteran summed up the M18 experience. People ask me if I was scared, driving a tank with no armor. Sure, I was scared. But I was more scared of being in a slow, heavy tank that couldn't run away. In the Hellcat, I felt like I had a chance. We were faster than anything the Germans had. That meant we controlled the fight, and that's what kept me alive. From the fog-shrouded valley at Arracourt, where Sergeant Staci fired that first shot through the frozen forests of Bastogne, where speed proved itself even in the worst conditions, to the final statistics that vindicated every controversial design choice, the M18 Hellcat proved one thing conclusively. In warfare, as in life, the fight doesn't always go to the strongest or the best protected. Sometimes it goes to the fastest and the smartest. The German Panther was a magnificent machine on paper, but the M18 crews didn't read specifications. They just drove their fast, lightly armored tank destroyers into battle, used speed and tactics to negate German advantages, and won. That's the story of the M18 Hellcat, the tank destroyer that proved speed could defeat steel, the vehicle that German tankers never expected to outrun their Panthers at 55 miles per hour. Until it did.